Let us now see if the Rig-Veda contains any direct references to the long day, the long night, or to the circumpolar calendar, beside the expressions about long darkness or the difficulty of reaching the other boundary of the endless night, noticed above. We've seen before that the Rig-Vedic calendar is a calendar of 360 days with an intercalary month, which can neither be polar nor circumpolar. But side by side with it, the Rig-Veda preserves the description of days and nights which are not applicable to the cisarctic days, unless we put an artificial construction upon the passages containing these descriptions. Day and night is spoken of as a couple in the Vedic literature and is denoted by a compound word in the dual number. Thus we have dawn and night, night and dawn, or simply the two dawns, all meaning a couple of day and night. The word shown also means day and night, but does not occur in the Rig-Veda, although Aitreya Brahmana treats it as synonymous with the word used for dawn and night. Sometimes this pair of day and night is spoken of as two sisters or twins, but whatever the form in which they are addressed, the reference is usually unambiguous. Now, one of the verses which describes this couple of day and night is 3:55:11. The deity of this verse is Aho Ratre, and is admitted on all hands that it contains a description of day and night. And it runs thus. The first 3/4 or feet of this verse contain the principal statements, while the fourth is the refrain of the song or the hymn. Literally translated, it means, the twin pair of females makes many forms. Of the two, one shines, the other dark. Two sisters are they, the dark and the bright. The great divinity of the gods is one and unique. The verse looks simple enough at first sight. Simple it is, so far as the words are concerned, but it has been misunderstood in two important points. We shall take the first half of the verse first. It says, the twin pair make many forms. Of the two, one shines, and the other is dark. The twin pair are day and night, and one of them is bright and the other dark. So far, therefore, there's no difficulty. But the phrase, make many forms, does not seem to have been properly examined or interpreted. The words used in the original verse literally mean make many bodies or forms. Thus we have a twofold description of the couple. It is called the shining and the dark, and also described as possessed of many forms. Elsewhere, the couple, day and night, is said to be Vishrupe, while in other places the adjective Virupe is used in the same sense. It is evident, therefore, that the bodies or forms intended to denote by these words must be different from the twofold character of the couple as shining and dark, and if so, the phrases used in connection with the couple of day and night must be taken to mean something different from bright and dark. If these expressions are not considered as superfluous or tautological, Sûrya interprets these phrases as referring to the different colors like black and white, etc., and some of the Western scholars seem to have adopted this interpretation, but I cannot see the propriety of assigning different colors to day and to night. Are we to suppose that we may have sometimes green-violet, yellow, or blue days and nights? Again, though the word rupa lends itself to this conclusion, yet, again, the one word lends itself to the construction the other cannot ordinarily be so understood. The question does not, however, seem to have attracted the serious attention of the commentators, so that even Griffith translates it by unlike in hue, also described in Natgoshasha 1:113-3, but there too Sûrya gives the same explanation. It does not further to have occurred to anyone that the point requires any further thought. Happily, though, in the case of Rig-Veda 1:113-3, we have, however, the advantage of consulting a commentator older than Sûrya. The verse occurs and is explained thusly. In the Dakshinâ during the year there is an increase of night, and the Uttarayana of the day. in Madhvas Virana, a scarce book, and I have taken the above quotation from an extract in his commentary given in a footnote to the Calcutta edition of the Samaveda Samhita, with Sayana's commentary, published by a learned Vedic scholar of Calcutta. It is not known who this Madhava is, but Pandit Satyavrata states that he is referred to by Durga, the commentator of Yashka. We may therefore take Madhava to be an old commentator, and it is satisfactory to find that he indicates to us the way out of the difficulty of interpreting the phases occurring in so many times in the Rig-Veda in connection with the couple of day and night. The word form, or body, can be used to denote the extent, duration, or length of days and nights, while other words would naturally denote the varying lengths of days and nights. In addition to the color, which could be twofold, bright or dark. Taking our clue from Madhava, we may therefore interpret the first half of the verse as meaning the twin pair assume various lengths. Of the two, one shines and the other dark. But though the first half may be thus interpreted, another difficulty arises as soon as we take up the third quarter of the verse. It says, "Two sisters are they, the dark and the bright." Now the question is whether the two sisters here mentioned are the same as or different from the twin pair mentioned in the first half of the verse. If we take them as identical, the third pada, or quarter of the verse, becomes at once superfluous. If we take them as different, we must explain how and where the two pairs differ. The commentators have not been able to solve the difficulty, and they have therefore adopted the course of regarding the twins and the sisters as identical, even at the risk of tautology. It will surely be admitted that this is not a satisfactory course, and that we ought to find a better explanation if we can. This is not, again, the only place where two distinct couples of day and night are mentioned. There is another word in the Rig-Veda which denotes a pair of day and night. It is Ahanî, which does not mean 2 days, but day and night. For as we are expressly told that there is the dark, aha, and the bright, aha. Ahanî therefore means a couple of day and night. And we've also seen that this also means a couple of day and night. Are the two couples the same or different? If Ahanî can be regarded as synonymous with Ushas, Nakta, or Ahoratre, then the two couples would be identical, otherwise different. Fortunately, though, the Rig-Veda furnishes us with the means of solving this difficulty. There, Ushas, Nakta, and Ahanî are separately invoked to grant protection to the worshipper, and the separate invocation clearly proves that the two couples are two separate dual deities, though each of them represents a couple of day and night. Professor Max Mueller has noted this difference between Ushas and Ahanî, or the two Ahans, but he does not seem to have pushed it to its logical conclusion. If all of the 360 days and nights of the year were the same class as with us, there would be no necessity of dividing them into two representative couples. The general description of dark, bright, and of various lengths would have been quite sufficient to denote all the days and nights of the year. Therefore, if the distinction is made in 455.3, it's not to be ignored, and we must find out the explanation of this distinction, and looking to the character of days and nights at different places on the surface of the earth, from the pole to the equator. The only possible explanation that can be suggested is that the year spoken of in these passages was a circumpolar year, made up of one long day and one long night, forming one pair, and a number of ordinary days and nights of various lengths, which, taking a single day and night as the type that can be described as a second couple, bright, dark, and of varying lengths. There is no other place on the surface of the earth where the description holds good. At the equator, we have only equal days and nights throughout the year, and they can be represented by the single couple, dark and bright, but always of the same length. In fact, instead of Virupe, the pair would be Sarupe, Between the equator and the Arctic Circle, the day and night together never exceed 24 hours, though there may be a day of 23 hours and a night of 1 hour and vice versa, as we approach the Arctic Circle. In this case, the days of the year will have to be represented by a typical couple, dark and night, but of various lengths. Soon we come across the Arctic Circle and go into the land of the long night. The above description requires to be amended by adding to the first couple another couple of the long day and the long night, the lengths of which would vary according to latitude. The second couple of the long day and long night would match each other, will also have to be designated as Virupe, with this difference, however, that while the length of days and nights in the temperate zone would vary at the same place, the length of the long night and the long day would not vary at one and the same place, but only at different latitudes. Taking a couple of day and night as representing the days and nights of the year, we shall have, therefore, to divide the different kinds of diurnal changes over the globe into 3 classes. At the pole, there is only 1 day and 1 night of 6 months each. Now, if we have an express passage in the Rig-Veda indicating 2 different couples of day and night, Ushas and Ahanî, which is evident in the Ahoratra, represented by them are the days and nights of the circumpolar region, and of those alone. In the light of 4:55:3, we must therefore interpret 3:55:11 quoted above as describing 2 couples, one of the twin pair and the other of 2 sisters. The verse must therefore be translated thus: The twin pair make many forms. Of the 2, one shines and the other is dark. 2 sisters are they, the Shaivai, or the dark, and the Arushi, or the bright. No part of the verse is thus rendered superfluous, and the whole becomes far more comprehensible than otherwise. We have seen that days and nights are represented by 2 distinct typical couples in the Rig-Veda, and that if the distinction is not unmeaning, we must take this to be a description of the days and nights within the Arctic Circle. Where the word means a couple of day and night distinct from Ushanataka in every place where the word occurs, it is difficult to say. But that, in some places at least, it denotes a peculiar couple of day and night not included in and indifferent from Ushkanatka, evident from 4:55:3. Now, if Ahanî really means a couple of the long day and the long night, as distinguished the ordinary days and nights, there is another way in which these 2 couples can be differentiated from each other. The ordinary days and nights follow each other closely, the day succeeded by the night and the night by the day. And the 2 members of the couple, representing these days and nights, cannot be described as separated from each other. But in the long night and the long day, though of equal duration, do not follow each other in close succession. The long night occurs about the time when the sun is at the winter solstice, and the long day when he is at the summer solstice, and these 2 solstitial points are separated by 180 degrees, being opposite to each other in the ecliptic. This character of Ahanî seems to have been traditionally shown in the time of the Aranyakas. Thus, the Tatriya Aranyaka, in discussing the personified year, first says that the year has 1 head and 2 different mouths, and then remarks that all this is season characteristic, which the commentator explains by stating that the year god is said to have 2 mouths because it has 2 ayanas, the northern and the southern, which include the seasons. The statement, which is important for our purpose, is the one which follows next. The Aranyaka continues: To the right and the left side of the year god are the bright and dark days. And the following verse refers to it. Thy form is bright, thy another sacrificial dark, 2 Ahans of different forms, thou art like Dayu. Thou, O self-dependent, protectest all magic powers, O Pushan, let thy bounty here be auspicious. The verse or mantra, here referred to as Rig-Veda 4:58:1. Pushan is there compared to Daiyao, and is said to have 2 forms, dark and bright, like the Ahanî. These dark and bright forms of Ahanî are said to constitute the right and left side of the year god, that is, the two opposite parts of the body of the personified year. In other words, the passage clearly states that the dark and the bright part of Ahanî do not follow each other closely, but are situated on diametrically opposite sides of the year. This can only be the case if the couple of day and night represented by Ahanî be taken to denote the long night and long day of the Arctic regions. There the long night is matched by the long day, and while the one occurs when the sun is at winter solstice, the other occurs when he is at summer solstice. The two parts of Ahanî are therefore very correctly represented as forming the right and left side of the year god in this text, and in the passage thus materially supports the view about the nature of Ahanî mentioned above. Lastly, we have the express passage in the Rig-Veda where the long day is described. An extended daily course of the sun is mentioned, and the Maruts are said to have extended their strength and greatness in a similar way. But the most explicit statement about the long day is found in 10.138.3. This hymn celebrates the exploits of Indra, all of which are performed in aerial and heavenly regions. In the first verse, the killing of Vitra and the release of the dawns and of the waters are mentioned, and the second, the sun is said to have been made to shine by the same process. The third verse is as follows. The fourth, fifth, and sixth verses all refer to the destruction of Vitra's forts, the chastisements of the Ushas, and the placing of the moons in heaven. But the third verse quoted above is alone important for our purpose. The words are simple and easy, and the verse may be thus translated. The sun unyoked his car in the midst of heaven. The Arya found the countermeasure for the Dasha. Indra, acting with Rig-Veda, overthrew the solid forts of Pipru, the conjuring Ashura. It is the first half of the verse that is relevant to our purpose. The sun is said to have unyoked his car not at sunset or on the horizon, but in the midst of heaven, there to rest for some time. There is no uncertainty about it, for the words are so clear, and the commentators have found it difficult to explain this extraordinary conduct of the sun in the midway of the heavens. Mr. Griffith says that it is perhaps an allusion to an eclipse, or to the detention of the sun to enable the Aryans to complete the overthrow of the enemies. Both of these suggestions are, however, not satisfactory. During a solar eclipse, the sun, being temporarily hidden by the moon, is invisible wholly or partially, and is not, besides, stationary. The description that the sun unyoked his car in mid-heaven cannot, therefore, apply to an eclipsed sun. As regards the other succession, in that the sun remained stationary for a while to allow his favorite race, the Aryans, to overflow their enemies, it seems to have had its origin in the biblical passage of Joshua 10:12-13, where the sun is said to have stood still at the word of Joshua until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. There is no authority for importing this biblical idea into the Rig-Veda. Indra's exploits are described in a number of hymns in the Rig-Veda, but in no other hymn is said to have made the sun stand still for the Aryans. We must therefore reject both the explanations suggested by Griffith. Sûrya gets over the difficulty by interpreting the phrase as meaning the sun loosened his carriage, that is, set it free to travel towards the middle of the heaven. Sûrya's meaning, therefore, is that when Indra obtained compensation from Vitra, he let loose the chariot of the sun to travel towards the midst of the day. But this construction is evidently a strained one. The verb vi is much used about a dozen places in the Rig-Veda in relation to horses, and everywhere it means to unharness, unyoke, or separate the horses from the carriage for rest. Even Sûrya has interpreted it the same way. Thus, vimuchya is explained by him as those shown above, and also compared to other verses. The most natural meaning of the present verse would therefore be that the sun unyoked his carriage. But even supposing that vimuchya can be interpreted to mean to loosen for travel, the expression would be appropriate only when there is an antecedent stoppage or slow motion of the sun. The question why the sun stopped or slackened its motion in the midst of the sky would therefore still remain unsolved. The phrase shown naturally means in the midst of the sky and cannot be interpreted to mean towards mid-heaven. Of course, if the sun was below the horizon, we may describe him as having loosened his horses for travel. But even there, the meaning seems to be that the horses rested at the place. In the present case, the sun is already in the midst of heaven, and we cannot take him below the horizon without a palpable distortion of meaning, nor can we properly explain the action of retaliation, if we accept Sayana's interpretation. We must therefore interpret this first half of the verse to mean that the sun unyoked his carriage in the midst of heaven. There's another passage in the Rig-Veda which speaks of the sun halting in the midst of heaven. King Varuna is said to have made the golden sun rock like a swing in heaven, clearly meaning the sun swayed backwards and forwards in the heaven, being visible all the time. The idea expressed in the present verse is exactly the same, for even within the Arctic regions, the sun will appear as swinging only during the long continuous day, when he does not go below the horizon once every 24 hours. There is therefore nothing strange or uncommon in the present verse, which says that the sun unyoked his carriage for some time in the midst of the sky. We need not be impatient to escape from the natural meaning of the verse. A long halt of the sun in the midst of the heaven is here clearly described, and we must take it to refer to the long day of the Arctic region. The statement in the second line further supports the same view. European scholars appear to have been misled in this instance by the words Arya and Dakshinâ, which are accustomed to interpret as meaning the Aryan and the non-Aryan race. But though the words may have been interpreted in this way in some passages, it's not the case everywhere. The word Dakshinâ is sometimes applied to Indra's enemies in a number of places. Thus, Shambhara is called a Dakshinâ, and the same adjective applied to Pipru and to Namuchi. Indra is said to have inspired fear in the Dakshinâ, and is described as having rent the Dakshinâ who considered himself immortal. In the verse under consideration, Indra's victory over Pipru is celebrated, and we know that Pipru elsewhere is called a Dakshinâ. It is therefore quite natural to suppose that the words Arya and Dakshinâ, in the above sense, refer to Indra and Pipru, and not to Aryan and non-Aryan race. The exploits described are all heavenly, and it jars with the context to take a single sentence in the whole hymn as referring to the victory of the Aryan over the non-Aryan race. There is again the word countermeasure, which denotes that what had been done is by way of retaliation, a sort of counterpoise or counterblast, with a view to avenge the mischief done by Dakshinâ. The battle between the Aryans and the non-Aryans cannot be so described unless the previous defeat of the Aryans was first alluded to. The plain meaning of the verse, therefore, is that the sun was made to halt in the midst of the sky, producing a long day, and Indra thus found a counterpoise for Dakshinâ, his enemy. We know that darkness is brought about by Dakshinâ, and that he's he who brings on the long night. But if Dakshinâ made the long night, Indra retaliated or counteracted by making the day as long as the night of the Dakshinâ. The long night of the Arctic regions, we have seen, matched by the long day in those regions, and the present verse expresses the same idea by matching the one of the other. There's no reference to the victory of the Aryan race over the non-Aryans or anything of that kind as supposed by Western scholars. Sayana, who had no historic theories to mislead him, has rightly interpreted Arya and Dakshinâ in this verse as referring to Indra and his enemy, but he in his turn had misinterpreted the first half of the verse in regard to the sun's long halt in the midst of the sky. The misinterpretation of the second by Western scholars, like Moon, who interprets Arya as meaning the Aryans and the Dakshinâ as non-Aryans. This shows how, in the absence of the true key to the meaning of the passage, we may be led away by current theories, even where the words are plain and simple in themselves. We thus see that the Rig-Veda speaks of two different couples of day and night, one alone of which represents ordinary days and nights of the year, and the second, the Ahanî, is the distinct couple by itself forming, according to the Kshatriya Aranyaka, the right and the left-hand side of the year, indicating the long Arctic day and night. The Kshatriya Samhita again gives us, in clear terms, a tradition that in the former age the night was so long that men were afraid it would not dawn. We've also a number of expressions in the Rig-Veda denoting long nights or long ghastly darkness, and also the long journey of the sun. Prayers are also offered to the Vedic deities to enable the worshipper to reach safely the end of the night, and the other boundary of which is not known. Finally, we have an express text declaring the sun halted in the midst of the sky, thereby retaliated the mischief brought by the Dakshinâ, causing the long night. Thus we have not only a long day and long night mentioned in the Rig-Veda, but the idea that the two match each other is also found therein, while the Taittiriya Aranyaka tells us that they form the opposite sides of the year god. Besides the passages proving the long duration of the dawn, we have therefore sufficient independent evidence to hold that the long night of the Arctic regions and its counterpart the long day were both known to the poets of the Rig-Veda, and the Taittiriya Samhita distinctly informs us that it was a phenomenon of the former age. We shall close this video with a short discussion of another circumpolar characteristics, the southern course of the sun. It was previously stated the sun can never appear overhead at any time in the temperate or frigid zone, and that observers stationed in these zones in the northern hemisphere will see the sun to his right hand or towards the south, while in the North Pole the sun will seem to rise from the south. Now the word Dakṣhinâ in Vedic Sanskrit denotes both the right hand and the south, as it does in other Aryan languages. For, as observed by Professor Seiss, these people had to face the rising sun with their right hands to the south, in addressing their gods, and hence Sanskrit, Dakshinâ, Welsh, Dehau, and Old Irish, Des, all means at once right hand and the south. With this explanation before us, we can now understand how, in a number of passages in the Rig-Veda, Western scholars translate Dakshinâ by right side, where Indian scholars take the word to mean the southerly direction. There's some third meaning of Dakshinâ, such as largesse or guerdon, and in some places the claims of rich largesse seem to have been pushed too far. Thus, when the suns are said to be only for Dakshinavats in 1:25:6, it looks very probable that originally the expression had some reference to the southern direction rather than the gifts given at sacrifice. In 3:58:1, Sûrya called the son of Dakṣhinâ, and even if Dakṣhinâ here being taken to mean the dawn, yet the question why the dawn was called Dakṣhinâ remains, and the only explanation at present suggested by Dakṣhinâ means skillful or expert. A better way to explain these phrases is to make them refer to a southerly direction, and after what has been said above, such an explanation will seem highly probable. It is, of course, necessary to be critical in our interpretation of the Vedic hymns, but I think that we shall be carrying our critical spirit too far if we say that no passage of the Rig-Veda is Dakṣhinâ or its derivative is used to denote a southerly direction. Herodotus informs us, in 442, that certain Phoenician mariners were commanded by the pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, to sail around Libya and return by the Pillars of Hercules. The mariners accomplished this voyage and returned in the 3rd year, but Herodotus disbelieved them because on their return they told to him such incredible stories that in rounding Libya, or Africa, they saw the sun to their right. Herodotus could not believe the sun to ever appear in the north, but with little thought as to what was incredible to him would itself be regarded as indisputable evidence of the authenticity of the account in latter days. Let us take a lesson from this story and not interpret Dakṣhinâ either by right-hand side or by largesse in every passage in the Rig-Veda. There may not be distinct passages to show that the sun or the dawn came from the south, but the very fact that the Ushas are called Dakshinâ and the son of Dakshinâ, is itself very suggestive, and that possibly we have here phrases which the Vedic bards employed because in their days these were old and recognized expressions of the language. Words, like fossils, often preserve the oldest ideas or facts of a language. Though Vedic poets may have forgotten the original meaning of these phrases, that is no reason why we should refuse to draw from history those words such conclusions as may legitimately follow from it. The fact the north is designated by the words Uttara, meaning upper, and the south by Adhara, meaning lower, also points to the same conclusion, for the north cannot be overhead, or upper, except to an observer at or near the North Pole. In latter literature, we find the tradition that the path of the sun lies through regions which are lower than the abode of the 7 rishis, or the constellation of Ursa Major. That ecliptic lies in the south of the constellation is plain enough, but it cannot be said to be below the constellation unless the zenith of the observer is in the constellation or between it and the North Pole, position possible only in the case of an observer in the Arctic region. I've already quoted a passage from the Rig-Veda which speaks of the 7 bears as being placed on high in the heavens, but I've not been able to find any Vedic authority for the tradition that the sun's path lies below the constellation of the 7 bears. It has been stated previously that a mere southerly direction of the sun, if completely established, is not a sure indication of the observer being within the circumpolar region, as the sun will appear to move always to the south of the observer, even in the temperate zones. It is, therefore, not necessary to pursue this point further. It has been shown that the Rig-Veda mentions the long night and the long day, and we shall see in the next video that the months and the seasons mentioned in this old book fully accord with the theory we have formed from the evidence hitherto discussed.